One of the most unrecognized forms of childhood trauma is emotional neglect and our emotional abuse. And yet it can have detrimental ramifications for a person's capacity to live a fulfilling life. When a child grows up in an environment where they feel unsafe or they feel unloved, where they're harshly criticized or judged, where they're humiliated regularly, and where their emotional needs are not met, where their emotions are not allowed, a child doesn't assume that there's an issue with their carer. Instead, they assume that there is something inherently wrong with themselves, and they internalize this concept of themselves as being bad, and they carry that through to adulthood, and they find themselves wandering through life with no capacity to regulate themselves internally because they were never shown the skills, and feeling like as if their needs don't matter, feeling like as if they don't matter, and they just continue on with this very low sense of self-worth, continuously feeling detached from life, unable to develop healthy relationships, and just feeling so unhappy. And unfortunately, oftentimes this is the source of people developing very negative coping mechanisms. And I suppose we tend to think of the more socially unacceptable coping mechanisms like addiction. However, we don't always look at things like perfectionism and, the need to be always working, the need to be always busy, just avoiding having to deal with your own emotional experience and recognize what is actually going on for you, or, let your guard down and allow people into your life. And again, we have all of these defenses, we develop all of these ways of protecting ourselves and keeping other people out, and we just walk around the place with a veil of shame for who we are. We are completely overwhelmed by our emotions, and yet we are doing our utmost to push them down and suppress them, in order so that other people don't actually recognize us, that we don't actually recognize ourselves. And ultimately, it means that we never get a chance to be who we are authentically meant to be. However, that being said, healing is possible, and it takes a huge amount of courage and a huge amount of commitment and diligence. However, once you start on the process, once you start recognizing that it is not your fault that your needs weren't met, and it does not mean that you were anyways unlovable, then you can start that healing process, and you can start recognizing your own needs as a person, and start giving yourself the space to exist, giving yourself room to allow other people into your life and to allow other people to love you, because ultimately we're all worthy of love. And just because somebody else wasn't able to meet our needs doesn't mean that there is an issue with our needs. And this whole idea of neediness and kind of people needing to be very self-sufficient is so against who we are as humans. We need other people, we need to be interdependent, and the more we're able to connect with others, the more likely we are to live a fulfilling, meaningful life, the more likely we are to feel calm and connected to ourselves, and the more likely we are to be able to develop our innate curiosity and creativity and become the person that we were always meant to be. And it's just about recognizing that you deserve to be in a good place, you deserve to have healthy relationships, and you deserve to be seen and to be heard. You deserve to heal, and you deserve to live the life that was always designed for you. And part of that is being able to recognize that sometimes you're going to experience very strong negative emotions, which somatically can feel almost intolerable. But it's learning to be able to sit with them. It's learning to be able to make peace with whatever life throws at you. And recognizing that when you're upset, it doesn't mean that you speed up. It means that you slow down, that you take a step back and you ask yourself, what do I actually need in this moment? And I suppose it's learning to recognize that it doesn't matter what happens now, it matters what happens next. So you can go through life being very reactive, assuming that everyone is out to get you and that your needs don't matter, and constantly feeling this kind of inner conflict within. Or you can take a step back and recognize some of the pain of your past and the impact it has on the way you interpret things, but choose to do things differently. And in order to make those discerning choices, in order to apply wisdom to your life, you need to recognize fully what is going on for you. You need to honor and validate how you feel, and then challenge how you think. And unfortunately, when we are not given that validation in our childhood, we tend to detach ourselves from our feelings and from our experience. We're numbed out, we're on autopilot, we're not connected to our own lives, and we're not very present because we have learned that to be present is to be in pain. However, that's not necessarily the way it has to be. And the more we learn to sit with ourselves, the more we learn to soothe our pain and our hurt, and to kind of detach ourselves from the stories that we're telling ourselves, as opposed to detaching ourselves from our feelings, then the more likely we are to be able to respond to life and not feel so overwhelmed and isolated and alone. And it's about learning to ground yourself. It's about learning to bring yourself into the present through breathing practices and contemplative practices, and just recognizing your own experience, just showing up for your own life as opposed to assuming that because you've lived a certain way up until now, you have to continue living that way. And it's about being accountable for who you are. It's about recognizing that, okay, you're going to make mistakes, and okay, sometimes you're going to be triggered, but that if you fully verbalize how it is that you're feeling, if you tap into your authentic experience and decide whether or not it needs to be investigated or whether or not it's something that you just need to work on internally, then you can be very clear about your movements and your choices and the way in which you engage with other people. And ultimately, a clear conscience is the softest pillow, because when we carry a veil of shame about who we are, and when we don't trust our decisions to be reflective of our true authenticity, then we always have this kind of gnawing feeling of guilt that we've done the wrong thing, that we've fucked up, that again there's something wrong with us, or that we're bad. And it's about giving yourself liberation from that. It's about freeing yourself from that space of always feeling guilty and always feeling ashamed, and allowing yourself to be in a loving, calm space, in a forgiving place where you forgive yourself, you forgive what has gone before if possible, and you begin to make the choices and the steps necessary to take your life down a different path, which isn't all about self-beration and which isn't about what other people think of you, but ultimately about being just a version of yourself which is loving and kind and just at peace. If you would like to work with me on any trauma you may have experienced in your life, or indeed if you'd just like to develop a greater sense of self-acceptance, get in touch with me on the website. It's fundamentals.ie.